Mercedes just showed terrifying straight-line speed in testing. Top of the speed traps. Explosive acceleration. Numbers that made rival engineers go silent. But while the entire paddock stared at those figures, Ferrari was doing something far more dangerous. They were overheating their own engine on purpose. They were draining their hybrid battery aggressively. They were running the same power unit across Barcelona and Bahrain, pushing it to the edge of failure. Why would a team risk that before the season even starts? Because what they discovered in 32-degree desert heat could decide the championship before the first race weekend even begins. And here is the part almost nobody is talking about. Mercedes' rumored 40 horsepower advantage might not survive a single regulatory review. If that power disappears, everything changes. If Ferrari solved their thermal weakness in time, everything changes. One team chased headlines. The other chased information. And only one of those strategies wins titles. Stay with me, because the quiet decision Ferrari made in testing might be the smartest move of the entire season. Barcelona looked calm. Too calm. Closed gates. No public data streams. Limited cameras. Perfect conditions to control a narrative. Mercedes arrived with a car that looked complete. Not experimental. Not fragile. Complete. The W17 rolled out and immediately began stacking laps. Long runs. Consistent pace. Nearly 500 kilometers without drama. That sends a message. Reliability. Confidence. Authority. And in Formula One, authority shapes perception. The side pods drew attention instantly. A much more aggressive undercut than Ferrari. Tight bodywork. Clean airflow management. Onboard footage showed stability through medium-speed corners. No visible bouncing. No erratic steering corrections. And on the straights, the car looked efficient. Low drag. Smooth acceleration curve. But here's what most people ignored. The ambient temperature. Around 15 degrees. Cool air hides stress. Cool air protects fuel systems. It protects cooling margins. It protects aggressive engine mapping. Cold conditions flatter performance. And Mercedes looked almost too comfortable. Which raises a critical question. Were we seeing true dominance? Or ideal conditions? Because testing is not about looking strong when everything is easy. It is about surviving when conditions turn hostile. And that hostile environment was waiting in Bahrain. But before we go there, we need to understand something else. Ferrari saw all of this. They saw the lap count. They saw the straight line efficiency. They saw the confidence. And instead of reacting publicly, they stayed quiet. That silence was not weakness. It was strategy. And what they chose to do next changes the entire context of Barcelona. Ferrari's start was not smooth. And that is exactly why it matters. Before Barcelona even began, the SF-26 suffered an electronic issue on its very first installation lap in Fiorano. One lap. That is enough to shake confidence inside any garage. But here is the difference between panic and planning. Ferrari did not hide the problem. They did not rush a new unit. They did not switch to a conservative program. They made a calculated decision. They would run the same power unit from Barcelona into the first week of Bahrain. Not to protect it. To stress it. Think about that. Most teams use early testing to preserve components. To avoid embarrassment. To build a clean image before the season begins. Ferrari did the opposite. They wanted to find the limit early. They wanted to expose weakness in February, not April. And that is a completely different mindset. In Barcelona, they ran a basic aerodynamic specification. No aggressive cooling exits. No dramatic bodywork revisions. No visible desperation. It looked simple. Almost underwhelming. Especially compared to Mercedes' sharp undercut concept. But simplicity can be deceptive. Because running a basic configuration allows you to isolate variables. You test the core mechanical platform. You test engine behavior. You test hybrid deployment. Without masking issues behind complex aero changes. And here is something even more important. Lewis Hamilton's integration began immediately. Short runs in Fiorano showed instant pace. But the real impact was not the lap time. It was the feedback. Hamilton reported a different feeling on corner entry compared to Charles Leclerc. That is not a small detail. When two elite drivers describe the front end differently, engineers are forced to reconsider balance philosophy. Front axle load. Brake migration. Differential settings. Everything comes under review. And this is where the story quietly shifts. Because while the world saw Mercedes stacking kilometers effortlessly, Ferrari was building something internal. Alignment. Driver to car. Car to data. Data to development direction. That foundation is invisible in lap charts. But it defines the first upgrades of the season. And Ferrari knew something else. Barcelona was forgiving. Bahrain would not be. The real examination was coming. And Ferrari went into the desert not trying to look fastest. They went there to see what would break first. Then Bahrain happened. And everything changed. The desert does not forgive design shortcuts. 32-degree track temperatures. Hot air. Low density. Relentless stress on cooling systems. This is where testing becomes real. And suddenly, Ferrari was at the top of the timing sheets. A 1:34.273 from Leclerc. Headlines exploded. Traction looked exceptional. Out of slow corners, the SF-26 hooked up cleanly. No hesitation. No wheel spin drama. The push-rod suspension absorbed curbs with confidence. While others looked nervous over bumps, Ferrari attacked them. Mechanically, the platform looked strong. Very strong. But that is only the surface. Because straight-line deployment told a different story. Halfway down the long straights, the hybrid energy began to fade. Clipping. The electrical boost ran out before the braking zone. You could hear it in the onboard audio. You could see it in the speed trace. Power building, then flattening. Hamilton described the frustration clearly. Losing deployment before the breaking point makes you vulnerable. It feels like the car exhales too early. And here is where things get serious. That aggressive deployment strategy may not have been a mistake. It may have been deliberate stress testing. Ferrari pushed the hybrid system to its maximum extraction window. They wanted to see where it collapses. They wanted to understand thermal crossover between battery and engine. Because in modern Formula One, energy management is not just about speed. It is about sustainability over race distance. And sustainability was the next problem. On day 3, with Hamilton behind the wheel, the engine shut down as a precaution. Thermal overload. The ultra-compact side pods that looked so elegant in Barcelona were now under siege. The hybrid system was generating more heat than the bodywork could evacuate. That is not cosmetic. That is architectural. Most teams would immediately open emergency cooling. Add bodywork vents. Protect the optics. Ferrari did not rush. They ran data cycles. They evaluated airflow sensitivity. They monitored temperature curves under different run plans. They were not chasing the headline. They were dissecting the weakness. And this is the key difference. When a problem appears under stress, you can either hide it or study it. Ferrari chose to study it. Because if you solve overheating in testing, you protect your season. If you ignore it, it destroys race weekends. Now compare that to Mercedes. Blistering straight-line speed. Yes, but inconsistent long-run rhythm. Nervous rear balance in crosswinds. Fuel cavitation rumors beginning to circulate. And suddenly the narrative becomes unstable. Ferrari's weakness was visible and technical. Mercedes' weakness might be hidden and regulatory. One is solvable in the garage. The other could depend on the governing body. And that is a very different kind of risk. But we are not at the most important part yet. Because what Ferrari prepared immediately after that shutdown is what makes this entire testing story far more strategic than it first appeared. What Ferrari prepared next is the part almost nobody noticed. Because while the shutdown made headlines, the response did not. Within days, Ferrari introduced a revised engine cover. Not dramatic. Not visually radical. But internally significant. Version 1.5. Refined cooling pathways. Adjusted airflow extraction. Better heat evacuation around the hybrid components. And here is the key detail. This was not a panic upgrade. It was pre-planned. The parts were already in motion before the overheating incident became public. That tells you something critical. Ferrari expected the thermal ceiling to be reached. They were waiting for confirmation. That is not reaction. That is validation. And it goes deeper. Alongside the revised engine cover, Ferrari worked on a modified floor, specifically aimed at stabilizing the rear diffuser. Because in Bahrain's crosswinds, the V-shaped diffuser concept showed sensitivity. High-speed corners exposed rear instability. Hamilton felt it immediately. A slight loss of confidence when committing at high speed. Not dramatic, but enough to cost consistency. So Ferrari linked two problems together: thermal management and aerodynamic stability. Why? Because overheating affects rear tire behavior. Rear instability affects energy recovery under braking. Everything connects. Modern Formula One cars are ecosystems. You cannot fix one area without influencing another. And this is where Ferrari's quiet work becomes strategic. They were not just solving heat. They were recalibrating the entire rear platform balance. That takes coordination. Engineers in Maranello. Trackside aerodynamicists. Simulation groups running overnight models. All aligned around one objective. Make the car stable over distance. Not explosive for one lap. And while Ferrari focused internally, Mercedes entered a completely different battle. because their performance narrative now depended on two uncertainties: engine legality, fuel stability. Thermal imaging from rival teams suggested unusual piston expansion under heat, allegations of compression ratios effectively exceeding regulations during operation. If approved, it is genius. If rejected, it is catastrophic. That is not a small technical tweak. That is a foundation-level variable. And at the same time, fuel cavitation in high-temperature conditions raised reliability questions. Fuel boiling under pressure, inconsistent delivery, power spikes, power drops. That explains why Mercedes looked terrifying one run and unsettled the next. So step back for a moment. Ferrari's weaknesses are engineering challenges they are actively solving. Mercedes' advantage may depend on interpretation and environment. One team controls its variables. The other waits on decisions. And in a championship fight, control is everything. But here is the part that truly shifts perspective. Ferrari never chased the fastest straight-line number. They chased repeatability. They chased predictability. They chased understanding. Because the most dangerous car in Formula One is not the one that looks fastest in February. It is the one that knows exactly who it is by March. And that is the quiet move Ferrari made while everyone else stared at Mercedes' top speed. They built certainty. Now the only question left is whether certainty will outweigh raw power when the lights finally go out. Now we reach the layer that truly separates appearance from reality. Because testing is not just about solving problems. It is about choosing which problems you are willing to live with. Ferrari chose to expose theirs early. Mercedes may have postponed theirs. And that difference could define the opening phase of the season. Think about development direction. If you believe your engine has a 40 horsepower cushion, you design your aero philosophy around that advantage. You run lower drag. You accept certain balance compromises. You push aggressive setups because power compensates. But if that cushion disappears after a regulatory clarification, everything shifts. Suddenly your rear instability matters more. Suddenly your tire degradation becomes critical. Suddenly your margins shrink. That kind of mid-season recalibration is expensive. Not just financially. Conceptually. Ferrari, on the other hand, is not building around a hypothetical advantage. They are building around known constraints. They know their hybrid deployment window. They know their cooling threshold. They know their rear sensitivity in crosswinds. That knowledge accelerates development. Because engineers are not guessing. They are refining. And refinement compounds over time. But here is where it becomes even more strategic. Hamilton's arrival changes Ferrari's internal feedback loop. He is not just adapting to the car. He is reshaping it. His request for a more stable rear platform in high-speed sections triggered immediate floor revisions. That means Ferrari is not only solving thermal issues. They are aligning car philosophy with a driver who understands championship campaigns. That alignment matters in race trim. Because qualifying pace creates headlines. Race pace wins points. And during long-run simulations in Bahrain, Ferrari's tire behavior told a subtle story. Rear degradation was noticeable under aggressive torque delivery. Yes, but once mapped conservatively, the platform remained predictable. Predictability is currency in Formula One. Drivers push harder when they trust the rear axle. And trust builds consistency. Now compare that to Mercedes' long runs. Strong sectors. Then sudden drop-offs. Moments of instability entering medium-speed corners. Rear stepping out due to forward center of pressure shifts. Different root cause than Ferrari. But similar visual symptom. The difference is origin. Ferrari's instability is thermal and mechanical interaction. Mercedes' instability appears aerodynamic and balance related. One is addressed with cooling and mapping. The other requires geometry and aero recalibration. And that takes time. So while headlines screamed about top speed charts, Ferrari invested in structural stability. They did not chase the fastest number. They chased the most repeatable one. And here is the uncomfortable question. If Mercedes loses even part of its straight-line edge due to regulatory pressure, if fuel cavitation persists in hotter venues like Jeddah or Miami, if the compression interpretation narrows, what remains? A car that looked dominant in ideal conditions. Or a car that has already confronted its weaknesses. Because championships are not decided in cool European shakedowns. They are decided in heat, in chaos, in unpredictable circumstances. Ferrari walked directly into that stress during testing. They invited it. They documented it. They responded to it. Quietly. And that is the part most fans missed. While the paddock debated who was fastest, Ferrari was preparing to be sustainable. And sustainable performance over 20-plus race weekends beats explosive testing pace every single time. So the real story is not that Mercedes went fastest. The real story is what Ferrari learned while nobody was looking. And when the first race weekend arrives under real pressure, we will find out which approach was smarter: raw power or controlled evolution. Because if Ferrari solved their thermal ceiling, if their revised floor stabilizes the rear under load, if Hamilton and Leclerc converge on a shared balance philosophy, then the quiet work of February becomes the foundation of March. And once momentum builds in Formula One, it rarely moves slowly. It moves suddenly. And the team that understands its car first usually understands the championship first.